Good evening, everybody. On my clock, it just hit 6 o'clock, so I think we'll start. And let me just change this to a view that I can see better. Okay. Let us start with the call to order, which I guess I just did, and the roll call. I know there's a few people out tonight, but let me just go through the list. Dakota Boulette.
I'm here.
Here. Joshua Burstein, that's me, I am here. Gary Campbell.
Yeah, I'm here.
See you. Hey. Tom DiLiberto.
I'm here.
Here. And Fifield.
I am here.
He. Alicia Hayes.
Here.
Here. Gordon Lafer, I believe, is absent. And Judy Newman, I believe, is going to be late, is what I read. Laurel O'Rourke. Here, waving. Maya Rabasa. See you. Hey. Erica Thesson. Juan Carlos Salye. Where's Juan Carlos? Oh, wait, hold on. I don't see him yet. That's what I have on the roll call. Okay, next is items for action at this meeting. And we have committee administration approval of minutes with the two meetings from February 28 and March 14. I see Juan Carlos now, so I will say check him as here. And so the minutes were sent out with the agenda. Does anyone have anything to say or move about the minutes?
Josh, I think I'm not sure, so I just want to clarify, since we don't have a quorum of the board, do we need a quorum of the board, Christine, or I think Christine's on there, I just can't see her. So I know we have a lot of budget members, but do we need the board? Is Christine on? Yeah, there she is.
Yeah, that's a good question. Christine, go ahead.
Hi, I believe that you do, but I'd like you to proceed while I check. Thank you.
Okay, that is fair. So we will continue talking and figure out if we can be official and vote and all that. So maybe we'll hold off on any motion.
Josh,
so
if I may,
yes.
This is a public body. We have to have a quorum, but it doesn't mean that we couldn't have the meeting. We can continue with the meeting in the agenda, just not make any decisions until we have a quorum.
Correct. I believe that's right. Robert's rules, right, Juan Carlos?
Correct.
Anyone have anything to say on that? Otherwise, we'll continue on. Sorry, Maya, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Judy's going to be joining us shortly, so we could just flip the agenda around and take care of that when she joins us.
This is true. Although at that point, would we have, let me see.
Yeah, we just need 4.
Alicia, Gordon, Judy, Laurel.
There's
3.
Oh,
yeah, 3 of now. Okay, yeah. Okay. So let's do that. When Judy joins us, we can then go to any motions or other decisions we need to make. So let us, so actually I do have another question. The next on the agenda is items raised by the audience, but if this is a public meeting, but we're not officially meeting, even though there's no one has signed up at this point, I'm looking for legal advice or Robert's rules advice. I think what I'll say, since no one has signed up, maybe what we can do. Oh, Christine, maybe you have an idea.
Yeah, again, I would suggest you just proceed until I am able to determine that you cannot. My baseline assumption is that we can, and I'm just checking the statute real quick here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Well, let's keep going. There's no public comment, and maybe once we get a quorum of the board, we'll again ask if there's any public comment at that point. I believe as of right now, we don't have any. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So then just items for information. We have 2 things on the agenda: development of the 4J other funds budget for district operations. And there is a PowerPoint that also was, you'll see when the screen is shared here. And the second one is called information items related to questions raised by budget committee members. And one thing I'd like to kind of expand on that with your permission is that this came out of our discussion last time about particular areas that people had questions or concerns about or thoughts on what should be included. And so what I would like to, with your permission, expand that to be not just the information items that will be related to questions or gates, but also if people have any other open discussion, thoughts or questions or anything on what they want to see, because I know that came up last time. So I think that it could be part of that discussion at that time, even if it's not listed exactly that way on the agenda. I think it's related to it enough. These are questions raised by budget committee members, and so we continue to raise questions or items at that point. And then that would be followed by the budget committee wrap up, which again gives us an opportunity to raise items and agenda items for next time, and then adjourn. So with that said, why don't we turn to development of the 4J other funds budget and the PowerPoint, and I'm looking, would it be Andrea? Would you be the one? Awesome.
Yep.
So let me mute myself and turn it over to you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen so we can bring up the PowerPoint. Okay, you should all see the slide that says other funds budget for district operations. Are we good? Okay. Now let's see if I can make it move. So we're going to start out, of course, just a reminder, in our January meeting, we talked about the general fund forecast, kind of started there, but there are other funds within our budget. And this is traditionally the meeting where we go into a little more depth on some of those other funds, just so that when you receive the proposed budget, you're not going to, stop at the general fund. You're going to look at everything that is included. So we're going to start out with our federal, state, and local programs fund and talk a little bit about the bigger grant programs that you're going to see in the proposed budgets that's coming up. This, of course, is not all of our state, local, federal grants, but these are the biggest players for next year. We start out with our elementary and secondary school emergency relief grant. That's ESSER 3. We had an ESSER 1. And ESSER 2, which we'll talk about as well tonight. And then ESSER 3 is the biggest of these 3 emergency grants. We expect to expend about $14.7 million next year under this grant authority. We also, of course, have the student investment account, the SIA grant funds that will be coming to us. This is funded through the corporate activity tax. And we are looking at about $13.3 million next year in available funding, plus a possible carryover of about $2.5 million. We are allowed to carry over any unspent funds into the next year, usually to the end of September. But of course, we will not know how much of this funding is available until we come to the end of the school year and are able to see what is left of our allotment. Our title programs, of course, Title I, Title II, Title III, and Title IV, will bring us about $5.4 million. That's a little bit down from our previous funding. Looking ahead to high school success, this is our Measure 98 dollars. We're looking at about $4.4 million to spend in our 3 areas, which include the CTE opportunities, career and technical education, I should say, expanded international baccalaureate and AP opportunities, and dropout prevention strategies. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in just a few slides. We have ESSER 2 grant. This should wrap up our ESSER 2 activity next year. We expect to be fully expended there, but we'll have an additional year or 2 with the ESSER 3 grant going forward. Our Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA, about $3.4 million. And we also have IDEA American Rescue Plan dollars available for next year. That's about $800,000, and this will be married with other funding to support our special education department. Looking at ESSER 3, this will be the first full year for ESSER 3 spending. Our budgets were approved in this current school year, so we will be going in basically looking at our spending from the perspective of what ODE has authorized us. We will make any updates if needed, but at this point we are looking at about 3.7 million for building improvements. That could be HVAC or other things that will be set aside to address COVID impacts and the learning environment. We have summer school dollars. So this money will be married with our SIA, our high school success, and another round of summer grants that are coming our way from ODE. So we will have a sufficient funding coming up for the summer program to do some really great things for students. We have a $1.4 million staffing pool. This is staffing available to address needs in the next year. About 1.2 for 2 additional days for licensed staff. This was part of negotiations. We will be expanding our BEST after school program. So we have about $800,000 set aside here to do that, bring that program to at least 2 additional schools. We have instructional software that we will be purchasing, as well as technology staff. We have some TSS3s out there helping our students navigate through the world of learning with their iPads and their laptops. And ending this first slide is about $800 million for instructional department initiatives. This includes money for wraparound services, as well as for equity programs, for training, many other activities.
800,000. 800,000.
Yes,
Yeah.
that is correct. So we have some money in ESSER3 for nutrition services staffing, as well as supplies, as well for transportation staffing, and for increased utility costs. One of the things that we've seen as a result of COVID is, of course, we are running our HVAC systems on a continual basis. That costs a lot more money, and that is something that we are allowed to fund through our ESSER funds. We'll have about $600,000 for charter school payments. They share in our ESSER3 funds, as well as most of our other grant funds. We have always extended these funds to support those students, as well as our 4J students. We'll have some additional student services department staffing focused in at our Fox Hollow campus. We have some staffing in other areas that will also support Fox Hollow and make sure they have some additional technology support there. We will once again provide ESSER funds for school supplies to all of our schools. We provide them with an additional $10,000 to each school that helps provide everything from additional school supplies so that students are not sharing. You know, as we know in COVID, you can't just throw the scissors in the middle of the table and everybody shared. Everyone has to have their own to keep those germs away. So we are making sure that our schools have funds to make those extra purchases. And finally, we will end up with a little bit of money for a website redesign and a parent communication app there, and for our translation specialist. Looking ahead to student investment account, to SIA, we have a lot going on and a lot of FTE associated with what we're focused on. We start out with 3rd grade reading. That's going to be about $3.5 million. As you can see, we've got a little under 17 FTE for classified staff and about 11.5 FTE for licensed positions, as well as funds to help support our students in reaching grade level reading competency by 3rd grade. We have our wraparound support team, about $3 million. That's going to bring support about 17 FTE. We're looking at HR coordinators, a suicide prevention coordinator, a counselor, 3 school social workers, I should say, 3 nurses, an instructional operations coordinator, 2 mental health specialists, and 4 equity coordinators, as well as about $1 million to support program services and supplies. To our final item here, we have our behavior framework, about $2.2 million. That's going to provide us with about 19.5 FTE and funding supports here for 8 behavior support assistants, a behavior threat assessment specialist, 6 student success coordinators, a teacher on special assignment, we call them TOSAs. So basically that is a licensed staff member who comes in to conduct special work related to education, and 3.5 school psychologists, as well as about $300,000 for program services and supplies. Maya, I'm glad I could, it gives me a little note at the top that you raised your hand. Thank you.
So I have a couple of questions, and if it's okay, do you want me to save them for the end or ask as we go along?
Why don't we get them out there just so that we don't forget by the end of the presentation, because it's a long one.
That would be great. So I'm wondering, all of these, on this slide in particular, but on all the slides, are these to fund the positions that are currently in place and continue those programs at the same level, or are they in addition to what is already in place?
They are to fund what is currently in place.
Okay.
For SIA, I should say that there are,
Okay.
there are a few new positions in ESSER
Okay.
and in other areas, but this is predominantly to fund staff that have been identified as part of the communication outreach strategy and are currently in place, or that we are actively recruiting for.
Okay, so then I guess my next question is probably for Superintendent Vanderkar or someone. I mean, I don't say that, I don't want to say you can't answer, but I'm curious, in the wraparound support teams.
Yeah.
All of the positions make a whole lot of sense, but I'm just one, except the 3 HR coordinators, and I'm wondering how they fall under the umbrella of wraparound support teams and are not just under the umbrella of HR itself.
So I'm going to ask a question of Brooke, who helped create the slideshow. Do you? I don't know.
It's a little misleading, Maya, and I apologize for that, because it's a job description that we have in human resources, and it's called a human resources coordinator. And so it's misleading in the sense that you think those people work in human resources, but they actually are 3 classified employees that work out at in our wraparound services that do our bilingual outreach to families. There's 3 people in those positions now. So I think that might be getting, I can't see you because my screen doesn't show everyone.
Oh, good. Okay.
Is it helpful for you? Were you thinking that these were actually people who worked in the Department of Human Resources?
Well, it felt like that was a whole lot of human resource coordinators for the number of positions that are wraparound. I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I see
Our
that
bilingual liaisons. It's our 3 bilingual liaisons that work.
Okay, so it's kind of like the same way that on this slide, it says equity coordinators, but when those jobs were posted, it was something very different sounding. It was like.
Those are our 4 regional equity coordinators that work
Right.
with students
Okay.
of color and families of color and our staff of color. Yep.
But when those jobs were posted, they were called something like really different sounding, right?
Because we have to work within our job descriptions.
That makes sense. So it's kind of like flip-flopping those 2 things.
Yes, exactly.
And then maybe Brooke, while you're here, on the slide right before this, or maybe on page 6, under the ESSER, there was $100,000 for translation specialist. Is that for the translation specialists themselves, and in addition to more services if we need them, or is that just what our translation specialists overall has as a cost?
That's our person.
Okay, all right. And I know this is the first year that we have that in place. If I'm not, okay, I see Sid nodding. Are we going to be looking to whether or not it was feasible for one person solo to take on the burden of all the translation? I know that has been a lot of work for one person, and is that gonna be under consideration when we are planning for next year? And then that's the end of my questions.
No, those are good questions, Maya. And I think originally we thought that because there was so much backlog with what is on the actual website itself, that maybe there'd be a point where there'd be a catch up, but there hasn't been. So it's a really good point you're making. And the 100,000 is really just the what we pay plus the health and then the benefits that go along with it.
And we do have other line items in departments that support translation. So that's not the only place where we have translation. We do have some of that goes out. We have some of that in-house in addition to the position. And then, as you know, next year in the teacher's contract, our licensed staff who are in our dual language immersion programs will get a stipend for translation.
Thank you for that discussion. I see two people hands raised. I saw Juan Carlos and then Anne.
Thank you so much for providing so much detail on these screens. I see that between the SR2 and SR3, there's about 18.9 million. Are those, I mean, you provided some detail and different line items, but are they the grants, are they completely restricted? Or are they given with flexibility to put in according to the needs of 4J?
So we have, I was just going to say, these are based on the budget that we have submitted to the Oregon Department of Education that has been approved by them.
So is there or there's no restrictions once that's approved or it comes back approved?
We would need to go back through the approval process to make significant changes.
Got it. Now I've noticed that there is a summer school program of 2 million. Is that district-wide? What does that mean? What kind of programs are there?
So that is actually being developed right now because we have several funding sources related to summer program now. We have a Oregon Department of Education summer grant for school, summer programs. We have funding available through SIA and through High School Success, and we also have money through ESSER. So we are working very hard right now to develop all of the aspects of that program and get it in place well before we hit the summer and have all our kids come in.
God, I'd like to hear more about it once that's done. And then the last two questions, I noticed you listed 2 mental health specs and 1 suicide prevention, I assume a specialist. Do you know how many total mental health specialists are there in the district? Or these 2 are it, and this 1 suicide prevention is it? I'm just trying to get an idea how many mental health counselors are there and how many suicide preventions total are there for the district?
So don't have,
Good questions, Juan Carlos. And we have some slides further down in the presentation to go over, because that was a big conversation at the last meeting. So we've been able to put together information about our social and emotional supports for partnerships and staffing. So I can talk about that now, but I could also talk about that when we get there. We have multiple mental health specialist positions that are funded from different sources. We have gone out 3 times for hiring since August for our mental health specialists and have not been able to hire. We are in the same predicament that our partnerships, we know that Lane County Health, we know Looking Glass, a lot of people are been hiring unsuccessfully of their mental health specialists. So again, our jobs are posted. We have 3 positions currently, and we're adding 1 from a different funding source that Andrea spoke about earlier. So that kind of is a little bit, but we're going to cover some of that a little bit later also in the presentation.
Thank you. Now we'll have you 2 more questions regarding to that subject. But I did notice in one of the slides talks about Fox Hollow campus. There's some dedicated funds for that. What's special about Fox Hollow campus? And are there many other campuses that are being funded like that?
I'm looking for Kat because she supports our Fox Hollow campus, which has a variety of programming. And some of the positions that that are going to be funded for that campus are behavior consultant, an additional mental health specialist. And so there are a variety of students with some different needs and need a more environment that isn't necessarily a mainstream high school or a mainstream middle or elementary school. And I don't want to speak a huge amount to it because Kat and her team are imagining that. And so I will, I'm feeling that she's not on the call, and we can get some more of that information for you, Juan Carlos.
Once you reimagine, this is great. Once you reimagine, the shape of what it's going to look like, is it in your plan to then try to duplicate to other areas of the district?
I don't want to speak for her team. I hear that she is on the webinar side. She's not a participant. So we could probably bring her in a little bit later. I don't want to say right this sec because I know other people's hands are up.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah, let me, Juan Carlos, if I may move to Ann and then Erica, have their hands up, or did you have one other, or you said you had other questions for later?
I will wait until that segment. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's move to Ann and then Erica.
Right, thanks. Let's see, I have, I think, a really pretty basic question about the ESSER money. It's federal dollars. Is that correct, Andrea?
That is correct. It passes to us through the state.
Okay, that's why you keep referencing ODE, but it's federal money, but they're kind of distributing it statewide.
Yeah, most of our federal funding comes to us through the state of Oregon, through the Oregon Department of Education, and they are the pass-through entity. Basically,
that makes sense.
They give the allocations based on direction provided by the federal government. In this case, we are allocated based on our Title I.
Okay.
Numbers.
And I'm sure you've covered this in an earlier presentation, but the ESSER 3 is one-time money. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And the SIA, because that's funded by the CAT tax, like that, is that looking fairly stable?
At this point, it is looking fairly stable due to our very robust economy here in the state of Oregon.
It's stable for now.
It's stable for now. But as we've seen in the past, we got a rocky start coming into these dollars. But the difference between the two, yes, is that ESSER funds have an expiration date. They are one-time funds only. SIA is at this point, I should say,
it's as reliable as any. It's less reliable than the property tax.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's something to think on all of these. Anything funded by ESSER 3, this is a one-shot deal. Is that right?
Correct. And each of the ESSERs ends at a different point in time.
Right.
So basically our ESSER 2 funds end their life in September of 2023. Our ESSER 3 funds end September of 2024.
Okay, thank you.
Erica, before I call on you, I just two quick things. One is Juan Carlos and Ann, put your hands down if you can. Thank you. And also I just got a information that yes, we do have a quorum that under the OAR statute, which I won't read you the whole thing, but basically we just need a quorum or majority of the total membership of the committee, which we do have. I believe we have 10 of us on the call right now. Out of 14 is the total of the committee, so we can vote and do things. Erica, go ahead.
I'm looking at the 3.4 million for the Individuals with Disability Act money. Is that any kind of an increase or improvement? Because I know we definitely need more support and staff and dollars for implementing and acting on IEPs and 504 plans.
So we'll have a little bit more information about some of that to come, but no, the funding from the federal government is not an increase at this point. It is pretty stable. It tends to run about where it is now. But we do have the ARP money for that is a one-time addition, and that will be available to support some staffing next year. Some very, of course, much needed staffing.
Great, thank you, everybody. And Andrea, why don't we go back to you to continue on for, I think we're on page 9.
Okay, I will move on. Okay, we start out with Learning for All. This is our special education initiative. We have about $2.2 million in this initiative for about 14.6 additional FTE and funding supports. So we have our Affinity group coordinators here, as well as for facilitating teachers, a little over 4 teacher program mentors, a director of equity, inclusion, and instruction, and a part-time teacher on special assignment, as well as about $700,000 in program supports. We have some additional support for our emergent bilingual student success plan. About $1 million is going to get us 4 additional ELL teachers and a coordinator position, as well as other program supports and needs. Best after school, we've got some additional funding here as well. To support not only some additional FTE for BEST, but also some summer school initiatives. And then we come up to class size reduction. And this is about $800,000. We are funding about 6.6 FTE for licensed teaching positions. Most of these positions will be middle school positions.
I'll just quickly jump in just to note that Judy Newman has joined the meeting, and Andrea, keep going.
Okay. So finally, wrapping up on the SIA, of course, we have our charter schools, and we will provide about $600,000 in payments to them. We have our high school student success. So we have about $500,000, and we are going to be supporting a 9th grade humanities studies for all of our incoming students there into high school. Indirect, what Indirect is it is a program that is approved, I should say a program rate approved by the Oregon Department of Education that allows districts to, you might say, assess an amount against a grant to support all of the things that need to happen to make sure that that grant is well managed, that it is, that all of the requirements and the reporting and everything else is completed. And so we can use these dollars to support the SIA grant going forward for things such as support of outreach, support of financial oversight, as well as support of reporting and other requirements. The Natives program, we've got about $300,000. That's going to cover the 2 FTE for that program, and any additional, helps there, which means that we can utilize the federal grant dollars for our Natives program for direct services to students. So we've basically supported the staffing portion of that through SIA, and that will provide more resources in total for our Natives program. Grant oversight, we have a small amount here for a couple of positions that directly manage portions of the reporting. And finally, for our affinity group supports, we've got about $100,000 here. This is mainly actual operating dollars for our affinity groups, for them, for events, for other needs to support their operation. This is not, this doesn't cover staffing, you might say, people. It's just to support these programs in the district.
Go ahead, Maya.
So, okay, I'm not muted now. No, okay, good. I'm curious about, so I see the affinity group supports is pulled out separate, but the affinity group coordinators is under Learning for All. I'm wondering why those are in separate categories. And I also noticed that in the Learning for All, there's one of our directors of equity, inclusion, and diversity, I'm not sure the order, DEI, I'm sure, is listed under there, but I'm wondering why not both. I'm just wondering what this Learning for All, I mean, from what I understood it as, it really pertained to inclusion in the classroom setting, in the gen ed setting. So I understand that my understanding is a little not unsophisticated, and I'm just curious why those are in that category and the affinity group supports is pulled out.
There really isn't a reason. The affinity group supports were added a little later in the process. Okay. So they just happen to be under their, you might say, under their own heading.
Okay. So I'm wondering then, why is the equity stuff under learning for all? And what am I not understanding about learning for all, I guess is my bigger question.
Some of our categories have a wide variety of activities underneath them. There, you might say it's the header, and then you have all of these different things that are happening underneath that header. These just happen to be allocated under that header.
Thank you.
So we come to Sr2. We are going to be wrapping up our spending with Sr2. And in the next school year, we're going to have about a little over $4 million left over, we hope. We have some technology initiatives that are still out there. One of those is about $500,000 to extend our wireless support outside of our school buildings. As we all know, a lot more things are happening in our playing fields and outside our schools to provide for that great airflow and when we need to get people together. So there is funds that has been set aside for quite some time to allow us to extend Wi-Fi out to those areas for streaming of athletic events and for support for any kind of outdoor activity, as well as some money here for support of technology and device purchases, as well as repairs or other things that may need to happen. As we know, we are at a one student per one device ratio, and that means that there's a lot of costs out there to keep that maintained and to ensure that repairs are made in a timely manner and get those items back out. Here you notice we have some money set aside again for the Fox Hollow campus. We also have money set aside for 4 regional 504 plan support positions. These will be classified positions, and they will help each region support the 504 plan process, making sure that meetings are scheduled, that other people are coordinated, help to really give this some structure and support here. These are new positions, in case anyone is wondering. So this is kind of a pilot to see if this is going to be a good way for us to support 504 plans and give our regions what they need. But the other positions here that we are talking about for Student Services Department, those will go to our Fox Hollow campus in addition to the other positions that we've talked about.
I see 2 hands. If we could just jump in, if you don't mind, Tom and then Judy.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw the 504 plan support, and that's for 504s all over the district. It's not just under SSD.
That is correct.
Okay.
Each position would be a regional position. So you would have one classified position for each region, and they would be helping to coordinate that effort.
Okay, and that's setting up meetings with parents, with staff to aid what some of the counselors have been doing.
That's exactly what our hope is with this, Tom, is to offset some of the paperwork and case management that some of our counselors have picked up. So we're hoping, particularly at the secondary level, that using this pilot to see how that, like I said, our hope is to alleviate some of that from a counselor's plate and free them up for some other much needed contact with students and have.
That was something I was going to bring up tonight. I was very concerned about that, and for years this has been a real burden for especially secondary counselors. Just the scheduling of these things, the organizational pieces of it are taking away folks where they could be used, I think, and be using their expertise. So I'm glad to see that. I wish we had more, but this is a good first step. Thank you. That was my question.
And after Judy, I see Erica. Go ahead, Judy.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is an area that could use some attention, so I'm glad we're giving it some attention. And I think my question is, I think, Andrea, you mentioned it's a pilot to see if it's effective. So how will we know it's effective would be my one question. And I hope that in that we include that the 504 plans actually the information gets to the people who are implementing them, so they actually get implemented. So how will we know?
Well, we have been getting information from our counselors. It's not through surveys, but it's through their group that meets. And this has also been a agenda item that we have been talking about with our JCAC, which is a group that gets together from the district and from the EEA. So both of those things, as we move forward with this, Judy, we analyzed our 504 numbers, particularly at the secondary, and seen that those numbers had risen. That was what was the discussion at the JCAC. So we have allocated the money and we're going to work on how we will implement and how this will look. And obviously in creation of that together, we will figure out our evaluation piece.
Okay, thank you.
Or feedback loop.
Thank you. I'll be anxious to hear.
Let me just say, I see Erica, hand, and then Gary, but then I think at that point we should go back to the slides, because we have, I think we're at number 12 out of 40 something, and we don't want to shut down conversation or questions, but just in the interest of being able to get through it all, let's continue to have questions. But for now, Erica, Gary, and then if we can go back to Andrea. Thank you all.
Thank you, Judy, for asking what I wanted to know too. And I just really want to reiterate the 504 plans. You know, as a parent of 2 kids with 504 plans, it takes an inordinately long period of time for the plans to get formulated. And then often, even though they're in writing, they aren't always implemented because the staff don't have the supports. And sometimes the staff aren't even aware that the student has a 504 for a while. So I really will be excited to see this, especially, you know, a lot of times we're seeing things that don't start until the secondary grade levels. So I appreciate this, and I'm hoping that we get good results from the trial.
Great, thank you, Erica. Gary, go ahead, and then we'll get back to the PowerPoint or slides.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this slide is specifically in the SR3 one a little bit as well too. Just sort of curious about the large amount of funding for very short-term funding going towards staffing is a little concerning since there are very short-term funds. The amount of funding that is available right now, I mean, 1.1 going to technology is good. Just sort of wondering about other ideas for investing in sort of infrastructure and thinking about resiliency for the future and how we could use the short-term dollars to make an impact that'll be more than just in the short term, that can last year over year. Thinking about like outdoor structures and things that could be useful for the schools that could be beyond, you know, the 2 or 3 years that this funding is available, that can have more long-term impact. Sorry.
Andrea, do you want to talk about some of the strings that we had to work through on each one of the ESSER batches of dollars?
So just talking a little bit about some of our capital improvements that does, you know, yes, we do have the option in some cases to go forward with capital purchases or capital builds, but anything of that nature has to actually be submitted to ODE for approval and has to go through a review process, which includes taking it to the board of directors for approval before we can even, you know, talk to ODE. So yes, we do have some capital spending as part of our ESSER funds, but anything that we decide to do there has to have a full and transparent process to bring it to life. It's not something we can just go forward with in the budget and decide we want to do.
Great, thank you, Andrea. And Erica, if your hand's still up, I assume that's just we'll go down. Andrea, why don't you continue with the slides that we're on?
Okay, looking at transportation, this is actually a combination of some short-term staff as well as some staff that will continue. Many of these staffing positions, the subject brought up is that this is one year money. Many of these positions, as they are needed, are going to be carried forward into ESSER 3 for funding in the following year. So that is something we've already planned for. And then we will have a runway for determining which positions should continue on past that point. So transportation, for example, has some driver trainers, because as you might have noticed, we've lost a lot of drivers. We need to train up some new ones, as well as some van drivers to help get some of our kiddos to and from school. We bought 5 vans as part of our ESSER capital purchase, and now we need some drivers. So we've got some staffing here for Eugene Online Academy. We don't expect in the long run that this academy will have as many students as it has had during the COVID pandemic, but we want to ensure that those students who wish to continue in Eugene Online Academy, we have enough staff to cover all of those needs. We have money, of course, left for our charter schools. They will draw this down in the following year. And then we have a little bit of money out here for campus safety. These are our evening safety staff who go out and make sure everything's going okay at our campuses, human resources staff to continue our COVID oversight, as well as a little bit of staffing for nutrition services and facilities. Looking at high school success, we'll have about $4.4 million for next year. About 1.3 of that is going to go into career and technical education staffing. So CTE teachers, program staffing, and classroom supports. We'll have about $300,000 for college opportunities and AVID. A new position coming up is the 0.25 FTE for AVID coordination. We've done that through contracted services in the past, but this will be an actual staff member. And of course, 2.8 million to continue our dropout prevention out there for teaching staff, educational assistants, of course, continue our 9th grade transitional coordinators, counselors, program coordinators, and some program supports. As we said, we're pending summer school grants. We're expecting about $100 million statewide. So that's roughly about half the funding we received in this last summer. But to give you an idea, statewide, we didn't spend all the funding we received last summer. It was such a push. We spent about $100 million across all of the districts. So we expect this funding to be roughly similar to our activities from the previous summer. We again expect that this will be a 75-25 split, so 75% provided by ODE through this grant and 25% as a district match. In the past summer, we used SIA funds for our K through 8 district match. We used high school success funds for our 9 through 12 match. But we also, as I noted here, have ESSER funds available as well. And basically, we are already beginning the process of planning for summer program. There are teams meeting on a regular basis. We're getting people hired for the summer. Everybody's really excited, and I think we're going to have a great summer program. So grant funding, just to give you an idea, you see this big yellow part of the bar, that's ESSER. So looking into these numbers, you can see that our federal revenue has been relatively stable, up, down, a little bit here and there, but you see this big jump here with state revenue, that is SIA. So we're starting to see SIA and high school success here, bringing the bar up. A little bit of growth in our other local revenue, but ESSER is the big dollars and will continue to be for the next several years. So jumping over to our special purpose reserves, these are the reserves we set aside for things like our curriculum adoptions, for the things we can't bond in adoptions that we need to make sure that we have funds for staff technology, making sure our teachers have their laptops and everybody's set up for what they need. Just as an aside, we were very lucky to be able to utilize ESSER funds as well as about $5 million in emergency grant funds to purchase laptops for all of our middle school and high school students as well as teachers in all of those schools. So that we can hold on to our staff technology reserves and use those for the next refresh. Just a note, as part of negotiation, we did suspend transfers next year for the staff technology reserve. We will, however, make the transfers for the curriculum reserve because we will be implementing new curriculum and we will need those funds in place. Looking at capital purchases in the 490, again, we have our equipment reserves. We have our student technology reserves. Both of those will not have a general fund transfer next year. And then we have our fleet purchases. This is actually funds that come out of the state school fund. They are related to depreciation on our buses and activity vans. And this funding is reserved for future purchases of buses and activity vans. We hold it in Fund 490.
Before we leave this slide, Laurel, I see your hand.
Yes, so we're talking, all this is about what is approved and being done for this year, but not for next year, correct?
No, this is for next year.
This is for next, what you hope to happen next year.
Yes, this is this is for next discussion for next year.
Okay, and you have like 43 slides of this?
Yep, I am working through.
Because my concern is that we have things that we want to talk about as far as the budget, and I know we have information we need to get in, but is it possible that we ask people to do their homework and then ask these questions instead of reading through a PowerPoint? I know you're adding more information and I appreciate it, but I also think our time may be used in a more efficient way, because we're at almost 7 o'clock and we only have a half hour more, and it's just been this and no conversation, a little bit, but it's only been about this. I want, and I'm very much interested in certain things that you guys have put in here, but not, I want to be able to ask about certain stuff if I have a question about it, but like this right here, I'm just like, okay, yep. There's other things that are really pressing that are happening in our community, and I really want to have a conversation and not get to 7:15 and people say, well, maybe we should have talked about this.
Well, I will move.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I know that I believe you said, or one of the 4J staff had said that towards the end of this PowerPoint, so maybe the last few slides are some of the answers to questions we had asked, like kind of, I think what Laura was saying, like concerns we had. Is that fair, Andrea or Sid?
We're not going to get there.
Okay, well, so the question is, if we, Andrea, let me ask it this way: if you were to run through it like you're saying, because to explain some of the funds and what they're for, et cetera, real quick, like real quick, and we don't interrupt with questions, then we get to in a few minutes can get to those part at the end that is questions that we had raised before, and some of the thoughts. Like I'm thinking some of that is like I know there's something about librarians project and about social emotional health support. Is that some of the stuff that's at the end there?
Yep.
Okay.
Or could we go to the social emotional the documentation that Brooke talked about that had been put together? Can we go to that and then come back to this if people have questions that are specific to this? Because I'm just concerned that we're not going to get there. I do appreciate the knowledge. This is way more than I had. I tell you what, but there are things that I think several of us have questions about, and getting that information out, I think, is really important to the public.
So how about I'm going to go through these real quick, hit the highlights, and we will get target 7 o'clock as beginning our second part of the discussion. Sound like a plan, guys?
I think that seems fair. Let's try that, and we'll check in about 7 or 10 minutes at 7 o'clock.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, let's go ahead on.
Okay. Student body funds, just what you would think. This is all our student dollars out there. You can see 2021, very small because everybody was home, but we expect spending to trend back up for the next year. Pension bond debt service. This is our site account. It is basically, we went out, we bonded, we invested the dollars, we pay the bond principal and interest, but we get a reduction in what we pay in our purse rate. So we're to the positive right now at about 770,000. Something to remember, we have a upcoming $120 million bond sale. The board will be hearing about the results of that in a future meeting. We will sell on April 5th. We will finalize on April 19th. Looking at this, the idea here being that we maintain the $2.24 rate for our debt service tax levy as agreed to by our voters. Capital projects, we've got Fund 400 and 450. These are our non-bond funds. Fund 400 supports our athletic fields in our partnership with City of Eugene. Fund 450 is what we use to take care of all of the program relocation costs, those smaller costs there, as well as some deferred maintenance. Looking at our capital projects, we have a very, very small amount left in our 2013 and 2011 bond measures. These have all been contracted for roof repair and replacement, and we will finalize everything and be done with this spending at the end of the summer. So it's all ready to go. We just have to get things started. We have to stop the rain so that we can get the new roofs on. Fund 460, of course, we are continuing. We're wrapping up Edison. We are continuing with North Eugene and Camas Ridge. We have an upcoming curriculum adoption for the instruction department for next year, starting July 1st. Of course, we have our bond staffing. This is all of our folks, our project managers, everybody there. We have some contracts for Title IX projects. This is like athletic fields, other things, as well as the CTE shop, and a little bit in technology for next year. Nutrition services, we have 19 schools right now that are in CEP program. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the next section. And we currently have free breakfast for all elementary students. Risk management, this is workers' comp, unemployment, all of those good things. And as you look here, you can see that the big change is under the workers' comp and unemployment. What this reflects was a potential liability for unemployment related to the COVID pandemic. That liability is continuing to reduce, but until we're out of the woods, we're not going to see a significant change. We have our licensed reserve funds. Those are the funds that are used to pay for insurance for all of our licensed staff. Currently, in 21-22, we are looking at a monthly contribution per full-time FTE of $1,260. That's $30 a month more than previous. Looking at our reserve levels, that means that our fund balance currently here is sitting at a little over $2 million, and we are seeing a stabilization of expenditures in this area. Classified reserves also saw a $30 per month per 1.0 FTE increase here. And reserves continue, fund balance is evening out at a little under our $2 million mark. Administrative reserve fund, also that $30 increase. You can see, of course, there's fewer people and it's a much smaller area here, about $400,000 in reserves. And of course, our wellness clinic, something that you'll see here, you see this line going down and suddenly it starts to go back up. That's when the per employee per month wellness clinic fee went up to $20 per month. So we are now stable in our fund balance and operations there. Post-employment benefits fund, these are the things, this is how our employees who have left us but aren't yet eligible for Medicare, these are supports to help them continue insurance. We also have an early retirement incentive plan that is still ongoing. And we are looking at our current general fund support, which is the normal 1.0 million. Post-employment benefits fund, as you can see, our current ending fund balance is sufficient to cover our expenditures. We are not required to put away the funds equal to our liability, but we do need to ensure that we can meet this contractual obligation. And we are here at the second part, 658.
Great, thank you. Andrea, thank you for running through that. And obviously, if people have questions on that stuff, we will go to it. Well, one other quick reminder, I believe, and someone from 4J staff help me on this, that if in a public meeting here, we don't use the chat function because it's not record or someone said, I see you're nodding. I can't remember I remember someone mentioned this before and I cannot remember more
Right,
about
well,
it.
We're not supposed to use the chat. It's considered a public record. So it's hard to manage.
Got it. Okay. So, well, with that, we're now at a point, I guess, where some of the question, who was, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, you can read what's in the chat if you want it to be easier as part of public record, but yeah, it's a lot easier for you not to have too much in the chat.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm just appointed, not elected, so I'm still new at some of this, even if I've been on this committee for a few years. So go ahead, Andrea, now with some of these, just as a reminder, these are some of the things that we had talked about as committee members in the past meeting or two, and some of the questions we had. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. So talking about, this is just some extra information on a potential elementary cost for a librarian is basically average teacher cost. They are licensed employee of about 116.8. Yeah, sorry, 116,760 a year. That is just our average cost based on next year. We have about 13 Title I elementary schools next year. We're adding one. I believe Adams will be our 13th. And our top 5 elementary schools based on need are Cesar Chavez, Howard, Bertha Holt, McCormick, and Family School, just to give an idea of what we're looking at here. Potential funding for this activity would be ESSER 3 staff pool funds. You saw those, the $1.4 million earlier in the presentation. Those would be available for the next 2 years. This was just a question, I think, on the South Eugene High School Child Development Center. There was some concern that we might have discontinued a position. We did not discontinue it, but we're having a very hard time hiring for it. This position requires a CTE teaching designation for child development, which I understand is not widely held by a lot of staff. The funding is still there. We are working very hard to bring in a new staff member to lead this. So Kids Eat Free next year. As you may or may not know, the federal government has said that they will not continue the current program into next year that has allowed us to feed all students this year without charge. So at our current CEP participation level, which is 19 schools, it would cost us about $650,000 next year to continue to feed all students for free. Basically, to do this under the federal program, we must be able to replace that income with other funds. And it looks like Holly is on the line, so I will let her talk about this a little bit more.
I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. So if we were to subsidize all schools, it'd be $650,000. I'm proposing that we continue with at least subsidizing elementary breakfast, which returns it back to pre-pandemic. And so that would only be for 6 schools. The reason I don't propose to actually cover all schools for next year is then you'd have to turn it off. And it would then be about 1.7 million when we have to cover all schools when they are no longer eligible under the CEP program. And the CEP program is a community eligibility provision, and that is a federal program that allows all kids to eat free without an application. And we do have 19 schools that qualified during the pandemic, but that will be reduced down to probably 3 or 4 schools in 2 years. And so everyone could be free for a couple of years if we wanted to subsidize it, but then all of those schools would fall off and it would be a huge investment from the general fund to cover that many schools. So that's why I'm not proposing covering all of them next year.
Thank you. Let me, so I see 2 hands, Laurel and Dakota, but Andrea, I think you have about 3 or 4 more slides with the other questions we had asked. Maybe get through that first and then we could circle back. Laurel, I have you on the list, then Dakota, and then anyone else after that, if that's all right. Go ahead, Andrea.
I am going to hand these next slides over to Brooke Wagner and her team to discuss this in more detail.
Thanks, Andrea. There were multiple questions at the last budget meeting regarding social emotional health supports that we have in the district. I broke them into 2 slides. I have 4J staffing on this first slide, and then the next slide will be 4J partnerships. So all of these positions come from a variety of funding sources. Some come from our general fund, some come from combinations of general fund and SIA. A little bit of them come from ESSER, but we added school psychologists out of our SIA money. We have added social workers out of our SIA money. These are all current positions. Some of them are not filled. And so I want to be clear about that. We have 3 mental health specialists. None of those jobs are filled because I shared earlier that we had gone out for 3 different recruitments and been unsuccessful. What we know and hear from our community partners is they're having the same issue. We have every elementary, middle, and high has school-based counselors that support social and emotional health. We have behavior consultants that work at the district level. We have a number of behavior support staff in all of our elementary and middle schools. We have a district behavioral safety assessment coordinator, which really handles our level 2 and level 3 students that come through referrals from counselors and administrators. We have our student success coordinators that are funded out of SIA. We have nurses that are funded out of SIA, and we have nurses that are funded out of the general fund. Our suicide prevention coordinator is funded out of our SIA student investment cap. And then most recently, we have our regional equity coordinators that we have 1 in each region. This is a combination of classified and certified staff that work out in our buildings and at the district office to support current social and emotional learning and mental health supports and a variety of issues that our students and our staff are needing support with. And on the next slide, you can see some of the partnerships that we have. We've been working with Roseburg Therapy for the last 3 years. HOOTS is a program that we fund that stands for helping out on the streets, and it's a mental health crisis response and intervention team that serves in all of our 4 high schools weekly. Through the Oregon Social Learning Center, we have substance abuse counselors that work with our students. We have partnerships with Looking Glass to have counselors in our schools. We have many of those positions open. Those are in addition to our school-based counselors. And Looking Glass is having trouble recruiting and hiring. 2 of our high schools have school-based health centers that we are contracted with Peace Health. That came up at a previous budget meeting. Lions for Life and Lane County Behavioral Health work in conjunction together to support our district. And then a new service that we have just started in the last 2 weeks is Care Solace, which is a referral system to mental health specialists that we obviously have not been able to hire. And then I don't know if there's another slide. Oh, so as we're talking about any new or additional health supports, obviously I've mentioned the recruiting piece and just thinking about flexibility with some of that staffing. Obviously a potential funding source could be any of the ESSER money that we have for the staffing pools, and then obviously any other funding sources that we could shift around. At the previous budget meeting, we did speak about the Student Investment Act and the community engagement, the large community engagement process we'll need to enter in for next fall. And so that could really have our SIA money look different after we go through that process. The SIA funding that we have and the SIA money that we've used was based on our community engagement process that we did 3 years ago, pretty extensively. So I think those are my 3 slides.
Thank you, Brooke.
And I think that brings us to the end. So
there we are. I have a list of 7 people now. So I'm just going to start off with Laurel, Dakota, and then it'll be Maya, Tom, Erica, Juan Carlos, and Alicia. Laurel, go ahead.
Yes, one of mine had to do with the South Eugene High School Development Center. But I think it actually ties into all of this in that we offer, from what I can tell, because you named some of the what did you call them, support services. A lot of those hire at very, very low base wages for the work that is being done. And as we know, we're at a place right now, hopefully close to the end of a pandemic, but not there, where we have a very high need and hard work. And I absolutely agree, we need to make sure we get the funding at a high enough level that we can get people to come work and help do this work in our schools. I have questions about, I would like to get sent out a job description for all the staff positions you mentioned under the social emotional, because I think I was surprised to learn that some of I think our school, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, but our school counselors and maybe school psychologists too work as school guidance counselors a lot. And so I really want to understand those that have the specific role to work with children and help them when dysregulation, when things are happening, and also this supports our educators, right? So I see this as more of a holistic solution, not just for suicide prevention, which is absolutely important, but for preventative work to get to that point where the hopelessness starts and then compounds. The other thing I would like to see the hours for those support services that you mentioned, because as far as I understand, most of those hours are not in the evening. And I would like to find out what support services are out there and what we can help with funding that would be a support in evening hours for our students. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, if someone at 4J can be taking notes, I'm sure you are, someone is, about the kinds of questions we have and the information we're looking for. Thank you, Laurel. Let's move to Dakota.
So I wanted to talk about the subsidization of the free lunch program that the current government is currently doing. I believe we should implement it no matter what the cost is. When 21% of Eugene's population is facing food insecurity and homelessness, we need to do better for our kids. So I think this is something that no matter what the price is, we should consider instead of just subsidizing for elementary schools. This is a big concern, I think.
Dakota, thank you for that comment. And I will just comment. I've been talking about that for a few years, as well as a couple of other board members too. So I can appreciate what you're saying. Next on my list was Maya.
Okay, I have a couple of things in the free and reduced lunch or free lunch breakfast. I want to echo Dakota's concerns. I fully agree. And it feels to me as those are interrelated with our mental health supports. It's pretty overwhelming to see your family stressed out about feeding you. And this feels like it has a direct correlation to that arena of our budget and attention. I also want to just kind of, I appreciate all the recruitment efforts like that. That's so important, and we won't be able to move on until we are able to find some success in that arena. But we really also need to think about the retention component. And I noticed in that list of folks, there was one that we've been talking about since the beginning of the pandemic and ongoing, and that's the nurses. And I'm curious, I'd like to know where we are. I've heard it suggested quite a few times that the nurses really deserve a pandemic related bonus. And I feel as though we are incredibly understaffed with the nurses, and it would be in line with what we did with our bus drivers, for example, in terms of retention and also into the recruitment arena. But so I'd like to know where we are with that, because I know I've heard it quite a few times. And then my last question, I guess, is that I don't know how to put it, word on the street, let's just say, is that because of the decline in statewide enrollment, ODE has been informing districts that they're going to be receiving additional funds per student this year. My understanding is Beaverton, for example, is getting 150 per student just this year. I'm wondering if 4J has been informed how what slice of that pie will be receiving, and if we have any intention of using that for these immediate crises.
Thank you, Maya. Unless the 4J staff has an immediate answer to any of that, I think I'd like to just go on with the list. And I know you're taking notes as well to give us some of these answers next time as well. I have on my list Tom next, and then Erica, then Juan Carlos, then Alicia, then Gary. So Tom.
Yeah, I'm happy to see the plans to add classified employees to aid the counselors in the 504 work. That's something that's has been a sore need for a long time. But there's some other areas where we can get frontline workers like our school counselors to help with the social emotional health crisis that we're facing right now. Scheduling is another area. Scheduling students is another really time-consuming task that could be re-examined. There might be pieces of that. And in fact, school counselors attest to this. There are many aspects of scheduling that don't always require a counselor if they're trained properly. And we have some great trainers in our district. The same goes for things that counselors do all day: bus supervision, lunch supervision, and in middle school, I think they're reinstituting break supervision. This is a lot of time, and it's not as if counselors aren't with. They don't see any students there, but a lot of kids who are in crisis, this takes away time from them. This would free up counselors to work more where they are most needed, directly with the kids and their mental health. And I'd love to know if the district is asking the people most involved in mental health, how can we make the best use of your time and help our kids where they need it most, directly to the people on the ground. I've done some of that. I know some of these people personally. They could also provide a lot of insight on how best to use some of the supports that Andrea went through, the regional and bridge counselors that we were talking about, and also engaging more closely the private entities, the HOOTs that were mentioned before. There's so much that if you just talk to the people who are on the ground who are doing this work, how we could get people to help our kids, it would go a long way. And I strongly encourage that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Erica, I have you next.
Yeah, I definitely want to applaud Andrea. Thanks for the information. And I totally agree with Dakota and Maya. I say we do what we can to feed as many children for free for the next 1 to 2 years. I really do. I mean, if kids are dysregulated now, one of the things that will make them more dysregulated even a year from now is not having enough food. So I say we do it as long as we can. And then, I mean, I know it sounds like we're kicking the can down the road because the funds will end, but I really do think we need to do it. I wondered, in a future meeting, if you guys could let us know how many school nurses we do have, because I know there's ratios that are recommended by the School Nurse Association, federally, because I think our nurses have been doing a lot and we definitely need more nurses. Something that brings up, I'm glad we're going to have a suicide prevention coordinator. I think that's awesome. We need it. One of my questions is about what kind of a person is going to be doing this. I want to make sure that this is a person coming in with a trauma-informed standpoint. As a parent who almost lost a kid to suicide, I want to make sure that the suicide prevention coordinator is somebody trauma-informed that's dealing with a mental health training and not looking at things through like a law enforcement or punitive or behaviorist standpoint. I really want to make sure that So I'm kind of curious what their training and qualifications are, and make sure that, because when a kid is in crisis, the last thing they need is somebody acting, kind of treating them like they're a criminal. They need help, not a behavioral program. So I would just love that information. So thank you guys for all the info. It's been very helpful.
Great, thank you, Erica. Good important points.
Can
I'm
we
sorry.
get that answered? What Erica just asked?
Does someone know in terms of the number of nurses, you mean? Or the hiring of a?
Oh, yeah, the hiring.
We have someone who is currently doing that position and has been for over a year. We were the first district in the state to actually hire. Her name's Angie Meyer. She's put we've shared some videos out, and so I can forward that to the budget committee. I can't tell you exactly what her resume says, but she has been working with partners and supporting students and buildings. And so I think some of you know who she is. I think some of you might not, but yeah, that position was hired last year.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Laurel and Erica and Brooke for answering that. And yeah, any information you can send out. Awesome, thank you. I have next on the list Juan Carlos, and then Alicia, and then Gary.
Yeah, thank you. Many years ago, the former superintendent in Springfield, Nancy Golden, had a strong belief about kids being ready to learn. And there was a tremendous focus on making sure the kids had food. So, I'm echoing what some of my previous colleagues mentioned, Cora and Laurel, and of course Maya. But I'm coming from a different perspective. It is about all of you understanding that for many, many families, school is the only source of food. This is reflected in how we, over the summer and during the pandemic, we had this tremendous effort to do food boxes. Other places that I volunteer on the board doing the same thing. So all the things that we're doing, the kids are not going to be able to learn if they're really worrying about where the next meal is going to come from. So from that perspective, I will tell you, let's find out. By all means, I do appreciate staff's recommendation, because I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but you're coming from a place of sustainability minded, which is great. We have to talk about, okay, yeah, you do this, but at the third year or fourth, everybody's not getting anything. So that's good to ask to know. But I also believe that if you make a decision to fund this, we will find ways to do it. So I want to say that, and I will stop there on that question. But going back.
Juan Carlos, give me one second. I just want to see if Holly, just on the food issue, because Holly from Nutrition Services put her hand up. So if maybe she could address what you just said, and then we can go back to the next question you had, and then Alicia and Gary. I appreciate that.
I'm sorry, I should have mentioned this before. So there's two pieces they're really important for the committee to understand. Technically, all kids have access to meals. Oregon passed a no lunch shaming bill. So regardless of the ability to pay, every child can eat breakfast and lunch every day. The district covered all negative balances during COVID. So every family is starting this year at a zero balance. So that's an amazing place to be to start next year. And then the second piece is Oregon also approved the extended income guidelines. So for example, a family of four making $79,500 will eat for free. So if we use those two mechanisms, pretty much every child that needs a meal will be fed without draining it from the general fund from perhaps other needs. Sorry, a poster just fell. So I appreciate and I agree that feeding kids is an important part of being ready to learn. I just wanted to offer that in case that helps prioritizing funds.
Thank you. And again, I've been talking about this for a couple of years as well. I'm sure this will be a bigger discussion also next meeting. Let's keep going. I know we have 7 minutes, but Juan Carlos had something else, and then Alicia, Gary, and Dakota. I also saw your hand up come up.
Thank you. I just want to finish up the last question. Thank you for responding to that. From a personal perspective, my family was lucky to eat once a day. And me as an elementary, middle school, high school student, we always struggled. So I know the pain, this actual physical pain of going hungry every day. So thanks for considering that. Regarding the mental health and what we call it the social emotional health, I am very pleased that we're talking about, something that we can say we're making a change or we're making recommendations. So Laura, thank you for bringing us back to this topic. I did notice that there were 11 different categories of people doing different things. And I'm surprised to see some of them. I just don't know. So I'm pleased that I'm being educated today. Like Laurel said, it would be good to see the job descriptions, maybe the hours, and some of those need really, in fact, Laurel mentioned that too, that it really will create the greatest impact after hours, because that will include some of the families and free up some time. But here's what I'm at. I wonder if you guys, your staff, superintendent, you have considered looking at, is there any duplications or any kind of jobs in which they're being redundant, or any opportunities to be more effective and more efficient? Because the redundancy sometimes, and I see in those positions, again, without knowing the job description, may in fact offer opportunities to collaborate and to partner in some ways. But again, I was surprised to see 11 different categories on that. And it's good. They're there for a reason. I respect that. But I think they're sometimes redundant, or they're working in silos. And that's really would not reflect both effectiveness and efficiency. So something for you to consider, please. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's move to Alicia and then Gary and then Dakota. And I'm just going to say 7:26, with all your permission, let's say we go 10 minutes over if needed to 7:40. People who have to jump off, of course, do, but I hope that's all right with everyone. Alicia.
Okay, thanks. First, thank you all for bringing up the food insecurity one. Carlos, thank you for the personal story. I 100% behind that and figuring out. And Holly, thank you for giving us the insight and the deeper understanding of how things work. Tom, your question about asking the counselors, excellent. Actually, they came and spoke to us, some of the psychologists, and talked about not really working at the top of their license. And so those classified positions came out of that conversation. So you asked that we talk to them. I will tell you we have, and they have talked to us as a board. So just wanted to affirm that, when we have people come and talk and bring concerns, we get a chance to address them. There was a question asked about nurses, and it wasn't really clear what you were asking for, but I'm just going to clear up what I would like to see. For me, it's what is the national average, what's the standard, and what do we have? Because I know over the last couple of years, we have been way below the national standard for a district our size. So just, there's no way we're going to fund at that standard, but just to kind of reiterate where the other gaps are in our system because of funding. And then the last question I'm going to ask is, I've worked with Roseburg Therapy, I know them, and I'm just really curious as to what are we as a district doing with that organization? And I don't know if that's Kat or if that's Brooke that can answer that question for me. Thanks.
If someone has an answer to that right now, Brooke or whoever, otherwise I'm looking around, otherwise we'll maybe save it for next time.
So I
So
don't,
go ahead.
oh, there's Kat.
So Alicia, you just want to know what, what we do with that organization right now. So right now they are, we have a referral system that we set up with Roseburg Therapy. So our counselors or our administrators, teachers, even parents can refer a student, and there's a form that gets filled out, and Caleb Salmon, who is our counselor TOSA, kind of our lead counselor TOSA, works closely with Josh, who runs Roseburg Therapy. And they kind of review those referrals twice a month and kind of look through them to see what some of our, bigger issues are and kids who are really needing, and not even just kids, but families as well who are in need of support. And then what we do is we offer 5 sessions for either a student or a student and their family, because sometimes we're trying to help families connect with outside resources and things like that. So we offer 5 sessions. If they have OHP, the copay will be paid for, and a couple of the other insurances, I can't remember all the ones that Roseburg Therapy takes, and will pay the copay. If they do not pay the copay, or say parents don't have insurance and they need assistance, we will still we will pay for the 5 up to 5 visits. And then Roseburg also helps connect them with outside resources, or work with our counselors or social workers to help connect those families with outside resources to get long-term counseling. So it's kind of a short-term, more of an interim kind of, we're here, we're gonna see, what your needs are, how intensive your needs are. And then if they need more intensive than 5 visits, they'll, like I said, we'll connect them with some outside resources and try to get them connected with them. Sometimes it's a couple of visits with Roseburg Therapy is, enough for a family or a child. So that's kind of what we're doing right now with them. I don't know if you had any follow-up questions. Okay.
Great. I have on the list Gary, and then Dakota. And then I see another hand. Oh, Maya, I see a hand. Anyone else? And then Judy. Anyone else I'm missing? I don't see any other hands right now. Gary, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to take a note. So I apologize for using the chat feature. It's there, and I'm just too tempted to do it since I'm in Zoom meetings often, and that's a thing we use. So for those in the public that weren't able to see what I said, I was just making a note that receiving the slides for the presentations ahead of time for the meeting might cut down on our back and forth about the slides. To speak to sort of what Laurel had mentioned before about us asking questions as we're going that may be answered in future slides. One thing that, or a couple things that I think could be useful in the presentations. So like ESSER funds specifically can be used to supplant current funding levels for districts. So I think anytime that in the discussion around ESSER funds or other funds that could be used for supplanting, could be a good idea to like make a note of when it's being used for supplanting versus additional funds for the district, just to clarify for that, to make it a little bit less time consuming for us to ask questions around that. And then anytime that you're presenting around staffing levels, specifically we're talking about nursing, mental health supports, again, sort of differentiating between what is just going to be ongoing supports for those with SIA funds or ESSER funds or other funds versus additional. So if you can make a differentiation between we're going to be adding on additional nurses or additional supports for students, that'd be useful for me as a budget committee member. And then Laurel had talked about this sort of the difficulty of getting mental health professionals into the district, whether or not we can maybe reduce the number of mental health professionals we're looking for in order to increase the wage or the salaries for those and be more competitive than the average, just as an idea to throw out there to get those folks to come to us, since it is a really competitive marketplace right now. I don't know if, how we're able to do that, but just throwing that out there as an idea. And then lastly, just sort of Josh with sort of housekeeping here, adding the approval of the past minutes to our next agenda, since we haven't gotten to those, just throwing that out there too.
I appreciate that, Gary. I'd forgotten that part. So yes, if we could. I have on my list Dakota, and then Maya, and then Judy. Dakota.
Never mind. It's perfectly okay. I don't have anything to say, so just skip me. It doesn't matter what I was going to say.
Okay, we will do that. Again, I always encourage anyone, I know we're also going over time as we did last time, but with all your permission for a few minutes, I think it's important we all do get a voice. So Dakota, if you do change your mind in the next few minutes after we hear from Maya and Judy, I think I just see the two of your hands, and please, Maya, go ahead.
So something we often talk about, but I don't feel like we've talked about maybe enough tonight, is the concept of the class size and caseload and how that impacts all of these questions here. I want to circle back to something that Erica said, and hopefully maybe we can talk about this again on Wednesday. So this is my heads up to you, Sydney, that maybe we can come back up. But Erica brought up the notion of suicide prevention and really being sure that it's not linked to any sort of criminalization of behavior, and even the perception of such is incredibly damaging. And I'm wondering if we could learn a little bit about why our suicide prevention specialist and our behavior threat assessment specialist, I might have gotten that title wrong, those job titles get me every time, but why they're, I was listening to Kat Lang talking about the work of our mental health specialists and our counselors and all those components of this work, but I'm wondering why those are isolated under the category of public safety. And I'm also thinking back to when we, our previous board had chosen to turn our public safety into a law enforcement agency for a handful of reasons, but regardless, like I said, the perception is potentially equally as impactful as the immediate impact. So I'm hoping we can learn about why those positions fall under that category and are operating in a silo, or appear to be operating in a silo and not under the purview of our student support department with Kat. That feels like an incredibly important piece of the puzzle to learn more about.
And if I may just piggyback on Maya, the Wednesday meeting is not a budget committee meeting that we have scheduled or anything. I don't want people to be confused. I assume you're talking about the 4J board. Is there a 4J board meeting this Wednesday or some Wednesday?
There is.
Thank you. I didn't know. So I just want to be, I didn't want people to think all of a sudden we had to be back on 2 days.
I should have clarified. I hope I didn't startle anyone, make you scramble
that's
looking at your calendars.
Surprise.
The advantage of being appointed, we don't have to do so. I'm sorry, Judy, go ahead. And then I think we'll try to wrap up if we can.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been madly taking notes on all these questions. Just want to also add my voice to the feeding kids being really a basic thing we need to do. And I'm encouraged by hearing from Holly. I think that maybe there's a pathway given the funding that we have, as long as we can keep it as low barrier as possible to families would be great. So, but I just wanted to say my understanding, I heard a couple people mention, and I think it's a really good point, when kids are struggling or need connection, or families, after hours. So I think Laurel, I think several people brought that up. So I think my understanding when we heard about Care Solace, I really don't know how it works, but part of the reason is to make sure we had access. I don't know if we could hear a little bit about that, about what we have and how much of a need that is still. So it could be tonight, it could be a different time, but I do think that's a critical component as well.
Sure. Let me just ask staff if, Laurel, I was going to say is ask staff if they had a quick answer to that, or otherwise we could put on the agenda as questions to be answered that you could bring back next time. But Laurel, go ahead.
The only thing I wanted to add is kind of an equity component to that. Care Solace is a phone number. So you have to have the ability to be able to connect to that. And if you don't, I guess you lose out.
I see no hand. Well, Judy, I see your hand, but I assume you're done. And I know over and over, I really appreciate everyone doing that. I think what I'm not going to summarize because I don't think we need to. I think we've talked about a lot of different issues, and I think staff knows kind of what we're looking at for more questions, more information. And I see Vice Chair Juan Carlos. Let me open to you for a minute, and then I think we'll move to the wrap up, which will be checking our agenda, the next meetings. Juan Carlos, go ahead.
On this agenda item, specifically on requesting for info or expanding conversations, I want us to make sure we keep that. That'll be a placeholder for those who need some extra info to be able to have an informed decision on making the recommendations back to the board on the budget. Having said that, I would like to ask staff to consider looking at what ways the list of partners can be expanded. It occurs to me that some of those organizations are nonprofits, they have to continuously be applying for funding for grants. So there could be some there in which we can increase the collaboration and partnership. I see it as a win-win. Many of them have to have those credentials. I mean, they have to have many credentials for this on top of the education. So this is why we're having a hard time recruiting people. So finding ways to expand the list and maybe even going in depth as far as it could be some even sharing, job sharing. So be creative on that as you're having a hard time recruiting. Because I know I've been a part of those collaborations in which we share a person with another nonprofit, has the same credentials, and that person is employed full-time, part-time here and part-time there. Just be creative. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I will take advantage of being chair just for a moment because I never put myself in the queue, but I just want to say one thing about the food issue, and I'm glad to hear so many people talking about it. It's been important. I think I've shared a story in the past of being in Salem waiting for a legislator and having, I think it was Mary and Jim Torrey at the time, but a couple of board members were up there waiting too. And there was a 9th grader at my daughter's school, North Eugene High School. This girl is now a senior, I believe, who talked about, I think I mentioned this last time, so forgive me if it's redundant, but who talked about not being poor enough, but not having enough money with her family to have lunch. And so I just want to really thank everyone. That's a particular personal issue of mine. I want to bring up. Dakota, there's your chance now. Go ahead. Well, if you could, everyone wait a few more minutes. Dakota, go ahead.
The fact that you brought that up, I wanted to comment. I was in that exact same situation of not being poor enough, but not having enough money to get food.
Thank you. I really, well, I should say I think your comments are really understood and appreciated here. And I know it's a funding concern, and this is in no way to dispel, Holly, you're doing great work. And I know we're all trying to figure out, we get paid for some things and not others, and we have to figure out what it is and all that. But I think we're all in this with the same ideas and hopes, and we recognize that budget is hard. I mean, why else would all of us spend almost over an hour and a half on a Monday night talking about this? So with that said, let me suggest that I think staff has probably done a great job taking notes with where our areas of concern are. Those last 4 or 6 slides from the presentation, I think, address some of what we talked about last time, and obviously there's been more today. I would also encourage people to email, I can't remember now, there was an email address set up that has me and Juan Carlos as vice chair, and I think Judy was on that as board chair, and Andrea, maybe someone help.
Lisa, will you remind us what that address is?
Yeah.
I'm
Yes,
looking it up.
It is. I'm coming on. It's budget leadership. Budget _COMM leadership at 4j.lane.edu. I will email it to all of the budget members again.
Perfect. If you could email that out again, like you just said you would. So that helps us set the agenda as well. Juan Carlos, before I say what our next meeting is, go ahead.
Do you want to go ahead and approve the minutes? Gary was reminding us to do so. Or do you want to wait until next meeting?
Let's put it on next meeting, because that way are we allowed to, is there a certain time frame? Let's just put it on next meeting because it's 7:43, and I want to try to be as respectful of all our times as possible, but probably will be quick. Juan Carlos, thank you. Our next meeting is, someone help me, 2 weeks from tonight? Am I right? Lisa, I'm sorry to call on you again. Well, maybe when you send out that email list, send out the list of the remaining meeting times and dates.
I will do that.
Awesome, thank you. I've said this before, I'll say again, it's a privilege to work with all of you on this. thank you all for what you all do and for taking the time, and see you soon. Have a good night, everybody. Meeting is adjourned.